I think one of the big problems we have as creative people is defining ourselves that way. I think if you define yourself, in terms of a relationship to something bigger, your family unit, God, something outside, country, something that's outside you, that if you were to go, it would continue. Definitions are boundaries, So as soon as you define yourself, you put a boundary on your ability to be great, and you say, I can only be great within the tiny area called writing. And if I fail at that, that's the sum total of my existence. Versus, like, for me, I'm like, well, I try and think of myself as a dad and a husband and a child of God and things like that. And those I can succeed at, whether people are reading my books or not.
This is Upbeat with beatboxer, musician, speaker, and show host, Parker Kane.
Hey, it's Parker with Upbeat, and I'm joined today by Michaelbrent Collings. Thanks so much for joining me on the show, man.
My pleasure. My pleasure. It's good to see you again. It's been a couple years.
Yeah, I actually was just looking back at the Facebook pictures, and it was 4 years ago.
Really? Dude, the world's changed a lot since then.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I guess that was right before everything shut down and went to crap.
Yes, right before the barbed wire enema that was that year.
So, yeah, just to catch up the listeners, I met Michaelbrent Collings at a TEDx event in Rexburg, Idaho, where you're still in Idaho, right?
Yeah. But not in TEDx. I'm a metropolitan kind of a guy. So, I live outside of Boise, Idaho.
Oh, that's where I live. Yeah.
We're fast, big, bright lights, big city kind of people here in Boise with our, 80,000 people or whatever it is.
Yeah, it sure feels like it. It's crazy, but definitely that Rexburg TEDx event was awesome. And you said some stuff in that speech that, by the way, still helps me today. But also, I had an event that I attended last month that they said some stuff that I remember thinking back to you saying similar things in your TEDx talk. And we can get into it, but one particular thing was you found hope in horror. That line has stuck with me. But before we get into the weeds on that, if you don't mind sharing just a little bit about you and your story of entrepreneurship and being a writer in multiple genres and whatever you're up to now too. Like I said, it's been 4 years, so you probably have different projects you're working on.
So many things. Yeah. So the short version is I did not want to be an artist or a creative type. I mean, I always enjoyed creating stuff, but I didn't want to have that kind of up and down nomadic lifestyle. So I became a lawyer, which was something, 4 people told me I'd be good at it. So I was like, I guess I'll do that. And I became a partner at a law firm, and it was kind of like the very typical, it was in Los Angeles. So it was kind of that fast paced existence. And then my wife got sick, and I went from being a full-time partner to like a part-time lawyer while I was being a full-time caretaker for her. At which point, after a couple of months of that, the partners invited me into the office and very kindly invited me to divest myself of my interest. And, they booted me basically. And I can't blame them with the amount of time that I wasn't there. So I was out of work, and the recession hit, and it was right when the bubble burst with, housing and stuff. And I couldn't get a new job to save my life. So I started writing stories, not thinking like, oh, I'm going to make a living, so much as I can't get a job and I got to do something or I'll blow my brains out. And it just kind of luckily took off. It wasn't like this, all of a sudden I was the Hunger Games, but I started making money and it snowballed a little bit at a time until I was, making more money as a writer than I had as a lawyer. And that's good, because once you decide to be, a full-time creative, you become functionally unemployable. It's like, am I going to go back and be a lawyer in 10 years? And they're like, what have you been doing? I don't know, sitting around thinking of ways to kill people mostly. Because that's what I do most. I'm best known for horror, but I write in every genre. I've been very blessed to have success. And literally, if there is a genre, I think the only thing I haven't written a bestseller in is erotica. Like, I've even done bestsellers in nonfiction and stuff like that. So I've been really, really privileged to have wonderful readers who kind of are willing to follow me. But my bread and butter is horror. And then last year I kind of closed up shop for a little while, just because my wife kept getting, we share a computer, so my wife gets ads for me, you know, like she's constantly getting, you know, Viagra and mortgage things, and I'm constantly getting, you know, bra stuff, and but she was getting all these ads for authors that were saying like, I will make you a bestseller, I'll make you $1 million, and I go to their website or on Amazon, and they've got 3 books with a combined total of like 8 ratings. And so my first question is always, if you're so good at this, why isn't it working for you? And I got really frustrated with that. So my wife finally was like, stop complaining and make your own course. So for the last year, I've been doing Bestseller Life at bestsellerlife.com, which is kind of basically, it's everything I know about the business of self-publishing and marketing. And so I've been really knee deep in that, just creating hundreds actually of lessons and handouts and things. And then getting ready for a book tour next year, because I actually landed my first traditional publishing deal. I went over to the dark side a little bit. Just there's a friend of mine at a national publisher who's been wanting to work with me for something for a long time. And honestly, traditional publishers offer, and I'm like, I can't, because it's a pay cut. Like they pay me less than I pay myself. But I've really wanted to work with this gal for a long time, and we've been friends. So I'll be going on a 6-week book tour for a book called Grim World, and it's a middle grade fantasy. So I'm just all over the place.
Yeah, awesome. Well, thanks for the breakdown. And yeah, I guess I didn't put 2 and 2 together that you were more independent and haven't really done, I guess, the traditional publisher way.
Yeah, well, I tried to, because like that's how everybody thinks. I wanted to be Stephen. Well, like I say, there was a lot going on, so I was mostly like, how do I not kill myself today? But I sent out, I think I have it. Hold on, I'll show you this. This is pretty awesome. So I sent out queries to literally every single manager, agent, and publisher in North America, not just the United States, everything above Mexico. And this is one of the binders of single page rejections.
Whoa.
I have another one. And those are literally just single pages saying things ranging from no thank you to it was really good, but not for us, to please set fire to yourself and end this travesty before you have a chance to reproduce. Just like a real range. So I tried to be trad pub, and then it didn't work. And about the time I kind of gave up, I had a friend who was like, hey, have you heard of this Kindle thing? And it was brand new. And I put it up just thinking, it can't hurt anybody. Like my book will sit there. And my first month, I think I sold like 3 copies, and I'm sure they were all to my mom. My mom opened sock puppet accounts, bought all 3 copies of that book. And I didn't even think about it after that until a friend of mine emailed and was like, can you have Amazon stop emailing me about your stupid book? I don't want it, And that was when I found out it was like the #1 bestseller in a number of different major categories, like horror and sci-fi and thriller and stuff like that. It was #1 or top 2 or 3 in pretty much every major category around there. So that was when I was like, oh, maybe I'll do this. I still don't have a lawyer job, so I might as well see what this does.
Right. And then, yeah, you've been killing it. And we could probably jump into that TEDx talk a little bit more too. And I guess I shouldn't even call it just the TEDx talk, because this is beyond that. Like, this is just something, it's part of your story. It's something that you stand for and that you share with people. But you've struggled deeply with depression, and kind of having a story of facing those demons, and that's what I love about that kind of one-liner, finding hope in horror. Is that's kind of what it all encompasses. But how have you been able to, I guess, push through those trying times? Because I know for a fact there are listeners to this podcast who ride that line sometimes even every single day. What advice, I guess, what have you done to help you, and what advice would you give to people?
I think, the 2 most important things I could say are #1, I'll tell a silly story. Like when I was young, I said, I discovered the secret of eternal life to my mom. And she goes, what is it? And I said, I've been watching movies, and right before people die, they always do the same thing. They go, tell my wife I love her, or whatever, the last words. And then they go, and then they die. And I say, so I realize, like, they need to breathe in. That's what they have to do. And so I'm going to hire someone. If it looks like I'm getting older, I'm weaker, someone's just going to follow me around. And their job is, when I go, they just scream, breathe in. And I'll go, and I'll live forever, And And so, she laughed about it, but it kind of became a way of living, because so much of life, when you do suffer mental health problems, so I don't just have depression, I've got major depressive disorder, suicidal tendencies, and psychotic breaks. And those are just like the top 3 in a best of list that's quite long. And so one of the first things is just breathe in, don't ever make a permanent decision to what is probably going to be a temporary state. I mean, like, I'm never not going to have depression. I'm never not going to struggle with that stuff, but there's good days and bad days. And the worst thing you can do is say, well, today's my bad day and this is it for eternity, so I'm going to end it, So I actually have like dates written in like dry erase on my bathroom mirror, where I go, today was a good day, to my wife, and she goes, write it down. So I'll write down these dates, just so that if I'm having a bad day and I'm like, it's always been like this, it's always going to be like this, and my wife goes, go look at the mirror. That's not true. That's your depression. She calls it my depression goggles. She says, you're looking through your depression goggles. Everything's viewed through that lens. It all looks terrible. But the reality is, look, last Thursday, you had a good day. And because you're depressed, or, you're having this mental break, I'm like, it wasn't really a good day. I just lied. And she goes, no, that's not how it worked. And that goes into, kind of dovetails into the second thing. The first thing is, don't make any permanent decisions in any temporary state. And I don't care if it's, I'm super happy or I'm super sad. Like, don't ask the girl to marry you right after the best first date. Wait until that cools off a little and see if you still like the chick, because when we're elated, when we're sad, we're crazy. We're not making good choices. So wait until that temporary state has abated. And then the second thing is, make sure you have a support system. One of the most leading causes of death, I think, for people who opt out, is not the act of suicide itself. It's the fact that they've isolated, because we convince ourselves when we're in that stuff, like, I'm in this terrible place. Nobody loves me. They're taking pity on me. Everybody really thinks I'm a sad travesty of I'm a waste of skin. And the only reason I have friends is because they're nice. I don't add anything to their life, and so we cut ourselves off from those people. And as soon as we cut ourselves off enough, hey, it's convenient to take the easy way out. There's literally been days where the reason I have not chosen to make a tremendously poor choice is, like, I don't want my youngest son to see my body. And I don't want him to have that mental mess in his head for the rest of his life because his dad opted out. And that's not a great reason to continue existing. Like, I don't want to inconvenience people. But if you take that away, if you take those people away, what have you got? You've got nothing. So it's not just having people actively care for you. It's just having people you're entangled with that your lack will inconvenience them. And sometimes that's enough, and if you build up enough of those webs of relationships, it's not just going to be, I'm going to inconvenience them. You will have people looking out for you. I've had nights where I've been curled up in the corner and, like, looking for something. I don't want to get really, really real and horrible, but this is life. Like, I've been looking for something to poke a hole in my neck with. And my wife is the one there saying, don't, we're here. You can't do this to us. You can't do this to the kids. You can't do this to you. If it was just me all by myself, if I had successfully cut myself off, I guarantee you I'd be dead in a ditch right now. I would not be talking to you. So that's a really long answer, but I think they're important. The first thing, don't make those permanent choices. And the second thing, have relationships, be out there with people. And some of us, I'm an introvert. You don't have to be a party person, but whether you're an introvert or an extrovert, I don't call them introverts or extroverts. Actually, I call them social hummingbirds and social anacondas. And what I mean by that is, a hummingbird has to eat every 2 minutes or it dies. Anaconda, you can eat a big meal and then be fine for 6 months. But either way, if they don't eat at all, they die. And that's what we are with relationships. Like, some of us need it constantly to nourish us. And that's your kind of extrovert. And then there's people like me. I need to interact with Parker, even just online. I need to interact with my wife, even just a minute or two. And that does me. I can be alone for a while and be very happy. But as soon as I completely wall off and Parker goes away and my wife goes away and the people at church and the people my family and the people I care for go away, you start to die of malnutrition, of emotional malnutrition. And it's a creeping disease for us introverts, because like, I'm used to not eating for 6 months. What's 6 months in a day? And that's when you make that bad decision. So, reach out and make sure you're joyfully entangled with all the inconveniences of relationships.
I love that. First of all, thank you so much for breaking that down. That's a lot of great advice. And honestly, if someone is listening who's really struggling, I would advise them to like re-listen to that anytime they need to, just to give them that hope. But also, I love what you said about just embracing, kind of the inconveniences. Like you might not think they're great, but they're super helpful. And
Yeah,
you got to be open-minded and kind of get out of your head a little bit. I think with the isolation thing, we just get too in our thoughts and we get too in our heads. And I'd imagine that happens to you a lot too with your writing and
oh yeah,
spending a lot of time creating the stories and stuff, especially in horror. But it's also kind of a good outlet too. So
yeah.
you got those two things that you mentioned, but then a third thing might be for people to have or find their creative outlets. How has, I guess, writing helped you? And in your stories, how much of the story is kind of like, I'm sure you get this question all the time, but how much of the story is kind of like actually you?
Right. Well, it's funny. I think any creative person, I'm sure you know this too. It's a double-edged sword, because on the one hand, it's something to live for. It's something that gives us joy. We feel like we're creating something. We're providing value to the world. There's like, I don't know that I care about leaving a mark upon the world. Like, how will they remember me after I'm gone? But I'd like to make the world better now, at the very least. And if you're out there trying to tell stories or sing songs or create sculpture or whatever your artistic outlet is, if you're trying to create things that you believe are of benefit to the world, then that's a good thing. The flip side is, I think every creator is this really strange mix of narcissism and cripplingly low self-esteem. We're all like, I'm going to change the world. And then at the very next moment, you're like, I suck. I'll never be any good. Someone comes up to me at a Comic-Con. There's like a line of people waiting to get my signature. And the person walks up and puts the book down. It's like, you're Michaelbrent Collings. And literally I like lean back, because I don't want this guy to punch me. Like, he's clearly going to go, you wasted my time. You're awful. Boom. And what that's so stupid and ludicrous, but it still is something inside me. And I think a lot of creative people grapple with that. So it's wonderful. But I think one of the big problems we have as creative people is defining ourselves that way. I think if you define yourself, in terms of a relationship to something bigger, your family unit, God, something outside, country, something that's outside you, that if you were to go, it would continue. Defining ourselves with those relationships, I think, is a pretty good idea. Obviously, assuming it's a good thing. If you're like, oh, I define myself in terms of my Hitler Youth affiliation, that's not awesome. But if you're trying to be good and have those good bigger picture things, that's great. But when we say, oh, I'm an artist, I'm a writer, I'm a beatboxer, like I still am blown away. I still watch with my kids like some of the stuff you do, because like I can't believe it. It's magic. It really is. It's so cool. But I think if we define ourselves that way, it really boxes us in, because if I'm a writer and my books aren't selling, what does that mean? It means I'm a failure. If I'm a singer and my albums aren't selling, I'm a failure, So I prefer one thing too, is if you are creative, don't define yourself with your creativity. Definitions are boundaries, So as soon as you define yourself, you put a boundary on your ability to be great. And you say, I can only be great within the tiny, tiny area called writing. And if I fail at that, that's the sum total of my existence. Versus like for me, I'm like, well, I try and think of myself as a dad and a husband and a child of God and things like that. And those I can succeed at, whether people are reading my books or not. And that also allows me, like, hey, if I need to walk away from writing someday, I can, because it's not who I am. It's a thing I do. And it's a thing I enjoy and that pays the bills. But if it stops paying the bills and I stop enjoying it, it's a weird thing. I think, like, if you're a doctor you can say, I'm going to go be a janitor for a middle school because I found my bliss and live my truth. And everyone's like, oh, he's so brave, But if you're an artist, and you go, I'm unhappy writing, so I'm going to go to medical school. Everyone's like, whoa, what a failure, which is crazy. Because you're just like, I've decided I'm trading up. I'm gonna have a real grown-up job and like better dental care than a crack whore. It'll be awesome. And but because we define ourselves as this artist rather than as something bigger, we get boxed in, and it can be really depressing. So, I always kind of counsel people especially who are starting out, like, don't buy into that trap. Say, this is something I'm good at, and maybe I'll make some money at it. And as long as it makes me happy, I'll do it. And if it stops making me happy, hey, I'll find something else. I'll pivot and find something else that makes me happy.
Yes, absolutely love that. And that kind of goes against the grain of like what people will find if they YouTube stuff, right?
Yeah.
That's been something I personally have struggled with recently, just in full openness about the podcast. I was doing it and it was making me happy, but was I making money? No. But I did have so much other amazing things come from that, and building an amazing network and all kinds of speaking events and whatever. But I got in my head about not having a specific niche. And when people were asking me like, oh, what's your podcast about? I'm like, it's called Upbeat. It's supposed to make people happy. It's like, well, who's it for? And I was like, oh, shoot.
Yeah.
Like, right. I was like, I thought everyone was supposed to be happy.
It's for the world, you fool.
Yeah. So I've been trying to get more niche, and it's weird. The more niche I get, it's more actually true to me, side hustlers who are feeling stuck and are struggling mentally, and I am getting there. But I love what you said about, definitions are boundaries. And that kind of is what everybody is told, is to define exactly what it is they're doing. And that is, I mean, it's a real kind of mental prison, real kind of mental trap. And so it's about pushing through that and just doing what actually is going to bring you happiness and push you through those times.
Yeah. I love the story of John Lennon. I think John Lennon, he's a fabulously talented human being, but also, deeply screwed up in a lot of ways. But a thing he said that I thought was really, really cool. He said he had a test when he was younger, and the teacher said, what do you want to be when you grow up? And he wrote happy. And the teacher said, you didn't understand the question. And his response was, you don't understand the answer. Because that's what we should be going for. And happiness is a weird thing too, because happiness used to mean like, how can I find contentment being productive and being a net benefit to other people? I think a trap that we have fallen into today with, because you're talking about YouTube kind of mentality, which is everyone wants to be a star. Everyone wants to live their truth. Everyone wants to find their bliss. And I 100% support that. 100%. You do whatever you want to do. The only caveat I would add is you better live on a desert island all by yourself if that's how you're going to live, because that is an inherently selfish way to live. I'm going to get out there and do whatever makes me happy, you're saying, and I don't care what it does to other people. And that is going to isolate you. People who are chasing after happiness in that way find themselves isolated. And they find themselves angry, like everybody's arrayed against them. And I go, well, of course they are. You've shown yourself to be a sociopath, basically. I'm going to like hurt anybody I need to. I don't want to judge. I really don't. So this is like, I'm trying to walk a fine line here, because I don't understand the things that are going on in others' heads. But I'm certainly saddened when somebody goes, well, I decided I was a different person than I was when I married this person, my spouse. And so my answer was, I changed and I left them emotionally destroyed, the children a wreck, just everything destroyed. And I'm not saying everybody who leaves a spouse or who changes their life is doing that. I want to be really clear, but there's a lot of people out there who's like, well, I'm not happy, so I'm going to be happy, and I don't care if it devastates everybody around me. And that works in the short term. But again, you mark yourself as somebody who is selfish and in it for you. And people notice that after a while. They're like, well, I'm living my truth too, so we'll be happy together as long as we agree. And if not, the battle lines are drawn. You're going to be enemies and you're going to be isolated. Versus, I like when I'm talking about like finding your happiness and defining yourself in terms of something bigger, I'm not talking about who you paint yourself as. I'm talking about the sense of community that you can find by getting out there and improving other people's life experiences. And I think that's one of the greatest things about art. Art at its core is creating communities. That's what we do. Nobody has a conversation, in line at Carl's Jr. about like, I'm team Crisp cut fries, I'm team curly fries, I'm team straight fries. You don't have that conversation. And if I walk in and start talking to a 16-year-old girl like that, she's going to call the police, right? Because I'm being creepy. But if I walk in and, after the last Twilight movie reboot comes out and I'm like, so are you team vampire or team werewolf? She's gonna be like, totally werewolf, And all of a sudden we're best friends, same exact location. We're still staying in Carl's Jr. But the difference is we have a community that's been created by an artist. And that's a really cool thing that we can do as creators, is make good communities that stand for good things, that encourage people to join versus being exclusive. I think exclusive fandoms are super sad and toxic. And they're most toxic of all for the people who create them. I'd rather be an inclusive person where if you don't want to read my book because you don't like horror, I'm like, cool. Awesome. What do you like to read? We'll talk about that too. Because I'm a storyteller. That's what I would rather just be a good storyteller. And I'd even rather just be a good human. So let's be friends. I think that creators can really do that. But there's all these traps for us. There's these mental inhibitions where, no, I'm a writer, so I got to sell a certain number of books. No, I'm an edgy writer, so I have to piss off a certain number of people. Oh, I follow my muse, so I don't really care what it does to my audience. No, I think we have to think about others. You find your truth, you find your bliss, that's cool, but you don't just go out and live like that. The next step is to think, how is this going to affect the people around me? And what can I do to mitigate its effect if it's damaging, or to bring them along so it helps them as well?
Absolutely love that. And then to kind of connect the dots with earlier in the conversation about, struggling with mental health and hanging on that one more day. Oftentimes it comes with, gratitude and serving other people, like having that mindset of just getting outside of you a little bit and focusing on others. That's where like fulfillment lies,
Oh, 100%. Yeah. 100%. I am happy when I write the end for like 5 minutes and then I get depressed. My wife and I call it PMS. It's my post manuscript syndrome. I get really sad and like, I just finished this massive project and I should be thrilled. And instead I'm like, ugh, this is the worst day of my life, but then I take my kids and my family, we went and assembled packages that were lunch packages for kids across the world who don't have lunches. It was free lunch packages that are shipping out everywhere. And we spent 4 hours it was kind of exhausting because it was like rapid fire scooping of beans and rice, trying to keep up with it, trying to, get as much done as possible. And I felt better doing that for 4 hours than I do after 6 months of a book. Or after, if I see #1 bestseller, I'm like, yay. And then I immediately go, now I have to get back to work. I can't fail. I got to be better. Versus getting out there and helping people and putting lunches together for kids. I'm like, this is awesome. This is where it's at. This is what I hope defines me, is my service to others, not that I'm a writer, but that I'm trying to be a genuinely helpful human.
Yeah. See, I think that's awesome. And it's really in line with the message of this upbeat podcast. It's just finding joy in the journey and finding out how to trigger like being upbeat through hard times and just being overall better and improving every single day, and not focus so much on the BS that can be so easy to focus on. I mean, every single time you open up your phone or TikTok or whatever, like you're going to see things that just immediately make you feel like crap or like you're not succeeding. And we need to kind of grab real life again and earth ourselves in things that actually matter.
Yeah, 100%. TikTok's awesome. Facebook's cool, whatever. I'm on it all the time because it's part of my job. I will say I got off it for almost a year and it was very liberating because it's genuinely detrimental to most people's mental health to be on that stuff. So when I say TikTok's awesome and Facebook's awesome, there's a wealth of information there. In and of itself, it has no positive value. I mean, people go, oh, I connected with friends. And I go, cool, what's your next door neighbor's name? Because if you connected with your high school buddy from 30 years ago that you kind of had a crush on, and you're checking periodically to see if their marriage is still working out, that's not a good thing. Go next door and just offer to mow your neighbor's lawn and say, yeah, I know it's embarrassing. I've lived here for 6 years, but I thought it was time I came over and introduced myself. You're going to have more benefit from that than you are from 100 or 1,000 likes. And those people who have these stellar careers, like you look at Mr. Beast, who my kids enjoy watching, and occasionally they'll kind of like pin me down and go, you got to watch this. And I go, okay, that's fine. I suspect I'll have more people at my funeral than Mr. Beast would, not because I'm better or anything like that, but because like I try and have interactions with people who live near me. And Mr. Beast has this massive following, and I mean this. I'm not like knocking Mr. Beast. He's a super popular name, so everybody knows him.
For the example.
So he seems like a cool guy, and he seems like he's trying to do good things. So I don't want to sound denigrating him at all. But like, do you think those followers, those billions of people who watch him, are going to just be like, oh, he died, where's the funeral? No, they'll be sad, but they weren't connected heart to heart. He wasn't a part of their actual life experience in its most significant sense. If I pass away, my neighbor's going to show up at the funeral because he's my friend and I'm his friend. And, he texts me, goes, we're going out of town. Can you take out the trash? Absolutely. I have the code to get into his house. I can go. He's always got good sodas. There's been a couple times where I was like, I want to go steal all the stuff from his mini fridge. But they're just such great people. And that kind of thing is going to lend a lot more happiness. And also, if you are creative, that stuff is good for your career. A couple of years back, the market shifted, as it does, just trying to stay ahead of technology and changes in the algorithm and the way different platforms sell art is exhausting in and of itself. And a couple of years back, my platform shifted, and overnight, like most of my friends, lost 80% of their income. It just disappeared because Amazon changed some things. And we were all struggling with that. And I kind of went, I can't do this. I'm going to have to go deliver pizza because I can't afford to take care of my family. And I announced my retirement to this 3 people that I thought would probably care. And immediately I started getting texts and emails from big authors who were saying, no, you can't leave. What do we need to do to keep you in this business? And I want to be clear, that's not because I'm a Nobel laureate. I'm not a paragon of literature. I didn't change their lives every day. It was just like I was kind of a cool guy and I tried to be nice to them, and they wanted niceness around them. So people really undersell the business value of kindness, of getting out there and making those connections. If I've been out there digging a ditch in your house, trying to save your house from a flood, and then and I have 1 million followers on YouTube, and then my business goes under, the 1 million followers are going to go away. The person who I dug a ditch for is going to be there saying, how can I help? So, just in terms of very much selfish, pragmatic business strategy, getting out there and being nice bears more benefits than being a successful whatever it is in our virtual landscape.
Yeah, I think that's a good like perspective shift for me and for everyone listening. It's kind of that encouragement to focus on just, the validity and like the what really matters meter. Like where does it rank in the grand scheme of things, like in life, in time on earth, like what matters more. And sometimes you can't just, I've used this example a lot recently, but you can't just, you don't have analytics for all those things. It's just life,
Yeah. Go to the supermarket and try and spend your likes, like walk up and put a gallon of milk down and go, I have 1 million followers. And they're going to be like, it's still $3. Well, it's still $18, whatever, milk is outrageous. Everything is so expensive now, but they're not going to accept that. They expect money. And I remember going to Target, and I'd lost my job. I had done all this work to try and be a grown up, and I didn't want to be that 40-year-old guy living in his mom's basement being like, any day I'm going to make it, baby. And so of course I lose my job and I end up where my parents' basement with my whole family. And I went to Target and I needed diapers for my son. our baby, and I missed it by like 16 cents. I couldn't afford it. And I'm standing there with this box of diapers and this kid I'm holding who's screaming and literally has poop in his diaper right now. Like, this is a current situation.
Yeah.
And this teenage checker just stares at me, and it was the worst feeling in the world. There was nothing I could do short of run out with the diapers, just like try and straight up hit and run kind of style diaper change. The person behind me pulls out a quarter and just puts it down, and like it was nothing to them. They just maybe they were a great person, or maybe they just wanted the line to move again. I don't know. But either way, that meant the world to me. And that's the kind of thing that matters, those little moments where we reach out and change somebody. And I guarantee you, anybody who's facing that, who's lived without food, who's not been able to buy supplies for their kids or for themselves, and you're like, oh, but you have 1 million followers. I'll trade all of those for diapers. I'll trade all of those for a quarter to take care of my family. And I think some of that perspective just comes with age. I'm older than most kids sitting there on their phones, doom scrolling. And for me, it's still tough. So I can't imagine being a 16-year-old girl and you're like, my entire world revolves around if my legs are proportioned properly compared to my favorite TikToker, that's just a rough way to live, and it's a dangerous way to live. And getting out there is the only antidote is turn off your screen, go out and do something nice for somebody, meet your neighbor, do a kind thing. It doesn't have to be a big thing. You don't have to be frickin' Mother Teresa. I spent 4 hours packing food, and I was like, dude, I saved 100 lives today. It doesn't take a lot to be a hero, and being a hero, man, that's a good feeling.
It really is. Yeah. And that's like that fulfillment, just versus the more material, like success or temporal success, like however you want to put it. But, well, I want to kind of ask some writing questions here, and
awesome.
Also maybe some more spiritual questions. I'm trying to decide which way I want to go with it, but I know you mentioned, or I'll go with the spiritual one. I know you mentioned earlier too, just in hanging on and being better. You mentioned your belief in God, and so I wanted to ask you, and this is a kind of initiative of my podcast too, is I want more conversations about like real core good values, also kind of Christian faith-based, tactical advice for people. How has your relationship with God helped you get to where you are today?
So I have a complicated relationship with God, and part mostly because of my mental health issues, because literally one of the symptoms of one of my ailments is a feeling of persecution from higher powers. It's in like the DSM, it's in the manual that defines this disease. It was kind of nice to find that out, actually, because I was like, oh, that really makes me feel better, because I just thought God hated me periodically. And now I can kind of go, oh, that's my depression goggles. One of the things is I look up and I don't see angels. I see some guy with a pitchfork just jabbing me and being like, ha, ha, ha. There's some days where everybody, I think feels that way, like looks up and go, why me? Anybody who's a believer, and I can't speak to people who don't believe in that stuff. Maybe they just look at the universe and go, you suck. But I feel like we all have those moments where we just feel crushed by a higher power. And again, so much of it is saying, I'm still breathing in and out, and that's a gift, and today sucks. I really get frustrated with people who are like, oh, if you prayed harder, if you had more faith, you'd be happier. And I kind of want to go, how dare you? Next time you see somebody who's fallen on the ski slopes and has like a bone sticking out of their skin, and you walk over and go, well, if you pray a little harder, that bone would suck in and you could just walk it off. We don't say that to people who have cancer or who have a broken bone. We might pray for them. We might try and bless them. My faith believes in healing and stuff like that. But you don't stand there and go, well, the bone didn't suck in, I guess you're going to hell. That's not how we operate. But when somebody's having a bad day, so many people of faith go, oh, well, you need to have more faith. You need to try harder. And I'm like, it does not work that way. God sends us all, I think, to earth. This is my belief, and I don't want to like push it on others, but you asked, so you made the mistake of asking. I think part of what God puts us here for is experiencing these trials, similar. I go to the gym And you don't get any benefit out of the gym unless you hurt yourself. That's literally how you build muscle, is you tear your muscles apart. And then they rebuild. And I think God, there's something of that with him. He's like, yeah, this hurts right now. Get through it. I'll help you get through it. And part of what people don't like about that idea is like, well, how could a loving God let bad things happen? And that is a legitimately frustrating question for a lot of people. And my response is, if this life was all there was, I would have no qualms about saying God is a turd. God is an a-hole, because obviously he's just a kid with a magnifying glass next to an anthill, and we're the ants, because life is unfair. But I do believe this life isn't all there is. And my hope is that the big picture, the eternal perspective, is it does even out. It does fair out, the good people get their reward and the bad people get their desserts. And that helps me get through the day too, because if you don't have faith, you look around and you know what? Life is still just as unfair, but there's no answer. It just stays unfair. And for me, I can go, well, yeah, today is unfair and tomorrow's unfair. And the next 100 years are going to be unfair. But my hope is that after that, it continues. This isn't the end. And so, yeah, 100 years of unfairness. But when you put that against an eternity of everything worked out the way it was supposed to, it seems to seem a little better, yeah, lifting that weight. Oh, it was so uncomfortable. And having a trainer scream, get it off, pick it up, you're a wuss, screaming. You're like, that's not pleasant. Nobody likes that, being screamed at by someone who's telling them they're a failure. But then, you put it up, you made the progress, your muscles are a little bit bigger, and you wouldn't take that back. You wouldn't go to the trainer, hey, could you be nicer to me? Because you see the result. And so that's something that my faith allows, is that sense of perspective. And I haven't set foot on the other side. I didn't have a near-death experience and see my grandma waving to me in heaven or anything like that. This is my faith and this is my hope. But I think there's validity to it, if for no other reason than it gets me through some of those days. There's days where I believe God gave me life, and I believe God is the one who gets to take it. And some days that's made the difference too, is just saying, no, I'm not going to put a razor against my wrist, because that's not my privilege. That's not my right. I don't get to make that choice. That's up to God. And I know that's thorny theological ground. So I'm not trying to talk about the death penalty, and I'm not trying to talk about big social issues. I want to make this clear. This is Michaelbrent's thoughts about Michaelbrent. But, it got me through that day. So I think there's some value in that.
Yeah, there's some huge value in that. And I think faith in general, whatever anyone's belief, listening to this, faith in something is what can pull us through those hard times. And for you and for me, it's God. And I think a lot of people listening too, but you got to hold on to something, and you got to have something. Yeah. And you mentioned too, like a support system and family. Like there's just things that have to be besides yourself that's going to help pull you through those times. So thanks for sharing that. And then I wanted to kind of move into some writing too, but this is more passion based, because this, again, big part of Upbeat is people pursuing their passions regardless of how weird it is. And I think you are a really great person to ask, because
I'm so weird.
not because you're weird, but because, writing horror is just not what you hear every day, and you've had to have had experiences where people are just like, okay, like, go for it, dude. And you feel weird, right? But at the end of the day, we can do those things that we're feeling called to do, and we can do those things that we feel passionate about. So what's been something that kind of pushes you along that journey, even with the naysayers?
Well, I do get that. It's not so much that the horror people, when I was a kid, I'm old enough that, like, if you brought a Stephen King book to school, you would probably be sent to the counselor's office, because when I was a real little kid, that was still kind of trashy stuff, and it showed you might have some kind of a perverse mentality. So people literally got sent to the principal for bringing Stephen King into the school. And now horror has a lot less stigma to it. Generally, it's a lot more open, and people are a lot more accepting of it as literature. Partly, honestly, because of my dad. My dad was an academic, and he devoted most of his career to writing books about horror, saying they have validity as literature. So he was literally the world expert on Stephen King for 20 years. He wrote the first book-length scholarly dissertation about King, and he followed it up with 12 or 13 more books. So we grew up with that in our house as a way of life, and not saying it's something to be hidden under the, like it goes with the dirty magazines, or nowadays it goes with my piece of paper with my porn password or whatever under my mattress. It was just like, oh, I read this really cool literature today called The Stand. Let me tell you about it, kids. And so I grew up thinking that it was fine. And by the time I started outing myself as a horror writer, because I was making money at it, everyone was kind of like, yeah, that's cool. The thing that twitches people is where I go, also, I taught Sunday school last week. That's where they go like, how does that work? And most of the people in my church, I'm a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and most people are actually really cool about it. Like you get a lot of people who are like, oh, I bet they yell and scream and fire and brimstone. And most people they're fine. I actually go see scary movies with my bishop all the time. Like that's because people are pretty cool with it. I do occasionally get somebody who kind of goes, really? You're right. Horror, and I can see it processing like, am I, especially when they just said, hey, that was a really good Sunday school lesson. And then they find out and they're like, wait, do I have to retract that compliment? Or, and when I tell people with that situation, I go, let me tell you the scariest book I ever read. And they go, I don't like horror. And I go, I'll keep it, PG. We're not going to mess you up or anything, but I do want to tell you this because I say it's a kind of a typical horror story, which they tend to be about an everyman, just kind of a normal person nobody thinks twice about. They find themselves in extraordinary and dangerous, horrific circumstances, be it an axe murderer or a poltergeist or whatever. And in this case, it's kind of the most horrific because it's a reality kind of a horror. It's this guy who he is falsely accused of these crimes he doesn't commit. He gets imprisoned. He's tortured horribly. All the people he thought loved him become his enemies. And then they nail him to a cross. And at this point, the person I'm talking to is like, oh, wait a second. I know this story. And I go, yeah, the Bible's a horror story. You cannot look at the descriptions of what happens to Jesus and to so many of the people who follow him and not think that's horrific. But it's a redemptive horror story. And that's what I try and write. And so I say, if it just ended with, and then he was tortured and crucified, the end, close the Bible and walk away. First of all, it's kind of a bummer. Second of all, I don't think it's going to be able to be very moving as a religious experience. But it doesn't end like that. And instead it goes, and 3 days later he rose, So essentially the monster was defeated. And in the Bible, the monster is Satan, it's death, and it's sin and all the things that we learn about in Sunday school. But that's applicable in the horror stories we write. In our world today, horror gets to talk about God, because if you have a devil and you call a priest to exorcise the devil, you are sticking yourself with both feet into religious philosophies, into theology and thoughts about metaphysics and what's beyond this. So that's one of the coolest things about horror. I actually say horror is the most moral of all the genres, because there's no other genre that's equipped to say, okay, we're going to talk about capital G good and capital E evil and what they mean to us as the little people running around under the angels and the demons. So, usually when I explain that, the people who, they might not say, oh, I'm going to go read a horror book. And that's fine, because you don't have to. We're all different. That's one of the joys of life. I don't want everyone to like horror. I want some people to like nothing but romance. And I want some people to love Twilight and other people to love Shakespeare. That's what makes life delicious, is all those different seasonings. But I do want people to appreciate each other. I do not like cheeseburgers, but I look at my wife's cheeseburger and I go, to me, that looks hideous. But I have started saying, I go, but that looks like it's probably a good looking cheeseburger to people who like cheeseburgers. And that's just my saying, like, I wouldn't eat it, but I'm glad you're enjoying it so much,
Yeah.
So I think you can walk. A lot of people put these false dichotomies down, that you have to like be this or that you have to be religious or accepting, that you have to be agnostic or intolerant, like, and it's just not true. We're such complicated creatures. I feel really bad for religious people who get painted with all the ills of their religion ever done, and I feel bad for atheists and agnostics who get painted with every nasty thing any atheist or agnostic said. I'm like, that's just a classy way of being a bigot, on both sides of that. And I would prefer to get to know somebody and say, hey, you and I don't agree on some things, but like 99% of what we're about is pretty similar. So I'm going to try and help you to be happy the best way I know how. And failing that, if you're not accepting or interested, I'm going to try and make you be happy the best way you want to be. And I think if we pursue life like that, there's a lot more common ground than the internet comment section would have us believe.
Yes, totally. Well, thanks so much for sharing your story, man, and that really unique perspective. That got me thinking, the gears turning with that story of, the Bible and how in pretty much anything you can find the good and bad, and
Yeah.
And it teaches us, not to just judge right out the gate. And
Yeah.
too many of us, all of us probably are guilty of that. And
Oh, for sure.
I'll tell you in kind of a humorous but truthful way, I was guilty of that when I met you. Because we were in that dark auditorium, man, and about to get on the stage at the TEDx event, and I shook your hand. I was like, "Oh, what do you do?" And you're like, "Oh, I write horror." And I'm like, "Oh crap, what am I gonna get into with this speech?"
Right.
But what
He's
I
going to murder
loved,
me later.
right? Well, what I loved about your speech that I remember too is throughout the whole time you had everybody laughing. It was like a comedy thing and a really motivational speech, and I think that it was just really a perfect delivery. I don't remember do you mind telling what the name is so people can look it up on on
It was
YouTube?
called Confessions of a Supervillain, The Psychosis of Lies.
It really was a good one, and I love that uniqueness and changing our perspectives, and it gives us something different to think about. And when you're in kind of this space that I'm in, everything's just kind of the fluffy fluff motivational stuff that we hear all the time.
Right.
And this is a really unique perspective. So it's been awesome.
Oh, thank you so much. That's so nice. I really appreciate that. That was not what I came on here for, but I'll take the compliment.
Well, hopefully you got out of it what you came here for too.
Yeah, no, this has been a delightful experience. I really appreciate you. We tried to do this a couple years back, so I'm glad that we finally made it work together. And I'm glad you're back in the saddle again doing this. I think, if I could, just one last thing,
Uh-huh.
creators who are not in the place they want to be in their career, often have this depressive thought of like, the world would not notice if I left. The world would be no different if I was gone, if I hung up, my microphone, if I put away my computer. And I do want to say the world will notice, like, especially, again, if you're happier doing something else, go do something else. But if you're finding joy in this creative outlet, do that. It doesn't have to be to make $1 million. It can be your joyful hobby. And similarly, if heaven forbid somebody's like, I'm going to take myself out of the equation. I'm going to kill myself. I'm going to do something, permanent, because no one will care. People will. The world notices that. And on a base level, and I'm serious, if this keeps people alive, awesome. It's just inconvenient. Nobody's ever been like, oh, I found a guy who killed himself today. It was a great day. But beyond that, in all seriousness, I think when people are so miraculous. I've met tens of thousands of people. I've never met anybody who didn't have amazing stories to share, amazing experiences to uplift, and an amazing soul that would leave a void for its loss. The people around you will notice, the world will notice. We are all these bright shining lights, and we need bright shining lights. It's a dark time. It's a scary time. So, don't snuff out that flame. Shine a little brighter instead of like blowing out the candle. Walk outside and burn bright for somebody else. Get out of yourself and say, hey, whose way can I light today? Because that's the way you will find value.
Really, really love that. And yeah, there's always another day. I just, as you were sharing that, I was reminded of what you shared earlier with your wife and like writing down the good days and remembering, like, in the moment it freaking sucks, but there's always going to be something else, and it's not ever going to happen if you're not here. So it's important to just live it out and do our best.
Yeah, 100%.
Awesome. Well, on a much brighter note, do you mind if I beatbox your name real quick?
Oh, I would love that. I would love that.
You're gonna close out the podcast that way, but yeah.
Nice.
Michaelbrent Collings.
That's so cool. That's awesome. So cool.
Hey, thanks, man, for being on Upbeat. Really appreciate you.
Thank you. This was great. Thank you. Anytime.